The ice in his whiskey hadn't even finished melting, but I knew that within 2 minutes, the man drinking it would be a ghost. I had exactly the length of a drink service to decide if I'd let him die or die alongside him. Around me, the lounge breathed with the scent of expensive hibiscus and sandalwood. The soft clinking of premium crystal and the low thrum of K-pop jazz masked the heavy metallic reality of the guns tucked beneath the security team's blazers. It was a playground for the elite, but tonight, it was a slaughterhouse disguised as a sanctuary. The air between us curdled. For a heartbeat, Hyunwoo didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon or even blink. He simply sat there, the tattoos on his neck appearing to tighten like a coil. The calm intensity in his obsidian eyes shifted from a predator at rest to one who had already calculated the trajectory of every soul in the room. Beside him, Julia's thumb froze over her screen. The mask didn't slip. It disintegrated. The auburn-haired woman who had been a picture of bored elegance moments ago suddenly possessed eyes as sharp and cold as the diamonds in her ears. She didn't look at Hyunwoo. She looked at me. "Is there a problem with the vintage Kiana?" she asked, her voice a silk-wrapped blade. "No, ma'am," I breathed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Just making sure the temperature is exact." The signal happened in the silence that followed. Julia didn't scream or shout. She simply set her phone face down on the white linen. It was the only percussion needed. The security guards by the entrance, the men who had arrived with her, moved with synchronized, lethal fluidity. The heavy glass doors of the lounge hissed shut, locking with a metallic finality that echoed through the room. "Get down!" Hyunwoo's voice wasn't a shout. It was a low vibrational command that bypassed my brain and hit my nerves. Before I could even process the movement, his hand shot out, catching the back of my uniform and wrenching me toward the floor just as the first pane of floor-to-ceiling glass shattered. The sound was deafening. A crystalline explosion that showered the room in diamond-like shards. The K-pop jazz was swallowed by the rhythmic, mechanical thud of suppressed gunfire. Julia didn't flinch. She stood up, her auburn waves catching the strobe-like flashes of muzzle fire, and moved toward the exit with a predatory grace that proved she was no victim. She glanced back once, her face a mask of cold fury, before slipping behind a marble pillar. "You should have kept your head down, little waitress," she hissed over the chaos. Hyunwoo flipped the heavy mahogany table with a strength that seemed impossible, creating a temporary barricade against the hail of lead. I was pressed against the carpet, the scent of expensive hibiscus replaced by the biting tang of cordite and scorched wood. He looked at me then, his hand steady as he drew a sleek, matte black handgun from his shoulder holster. There was no warmth in his gaze, only a terrifying, focused clarity. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice cutting through the screams of the other guests. "If you want to live to see your brother, do not let go of my jacket." The glass walls were gone, replaced by a kill zone of flying sparks and whistling metal. The lounge was no longer a sanctuary of wealth. It was a cage, and the only exit was through the men Julia had brought to kill the man I had just tried to save. Hyunwoo stood, a silhouette of ink and vengeance against the neon city lights, and began to fire back. The tires of the armored sedan shrieked against the asphalt, a high-pitched wail that echoed the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Behind us, the lounge was a fading constellation of shattered glass and muzzle flashes, shrinking into the distance as we plummeted into the neon-drenched arteries of the city. Hyunwoo sat beside me, his silhouette cutting a sharp, dark line against the blur of passing streetlights. He wasn't breathing hard, but his jaw was set with a ferocity that made the air in the cabin feel heavy. "Keep your head down," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper above the roar of the engine. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the side mirror, watching the two black SUVs that had swung out of an alleyway to flank us. The driver, a man named Jace with a face like etched granite, yanked the wheel. I was thrown against Hyunwoo, my shoulder hitting the solid muscle of his chest. He didn't flinch. Instead, his arm wrapped around me, pinning me securely against the seat as the car drifted through a tight corner, the scent of burning rubber filling the interior. Suddenly, the rear window spiderwebbed. A rhythmic thud-thud-thud of bullets hammered against the reinforced glass, sounding like hailstones from hell. I let out a choked gasp, burying my face in the fabric of his suit jacket. It smelled of expensive cedar and the sharp metallic tang of gunpowder. "They're hitting the tires," Jace grunted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Extraction point is 6 blocks out. I don't know if the rims will hold." "Make them hold," Hyunwoo replied. He reached into the door panel, pulling out a compact submachine gun with the practiced ease of a man handling a fountain pen. He lowered the window just an inch, the freezing city air whipping into the car like a physical blow. The world became a chaotic montage of light and violence. Sparks flew from our rear wheels as we scraped against a concrete barrier to avoid a pit maneuver from the lead SUV. Hyunwoo leaned out slightly, the stutter of his weapon vibrating through the frame of the car. One of the pursuing vehicles swerved, its windshield blooming into a red mist before it collided with a parked delivery truck in a spectacular plume of fire. Despite the terror, a strange clarity washed over me. I looked at the man holding me, the monster the city whispered about. He was the only thing standing between me and the cold auburn-haired woman who wanted us both erased. "We're hitting the bridge," Jace yelled. The car leaped as we hit the expansion joint of the steel-grated bridge, the dark river churning below. The extraction point, a nondescript freight yard on the far bank, was in sight, but the remaining SUV was closing the gap, its headlights blinding in our rearview. My life was no longer measured in years or months, but in the frantic seconds it took to cross that bridge. I gripped Hyunwoo's sleeve, my fingers locking into the fine wool. And for the first time, I didn't care whose blood was on his hands as long as those hands didn't let go. The sedan skidded to a halt inside a subterranean garage that felt more like a bunker than a parking structure. The air here was dead, filtered and heavy with the scent of ozone and cold steel. Hyunwoo didn't wait for the engine to die before he was out of the car, his hand reaching back to pull me into the shadows of the concrete pillars. "Keep moving," he muttered. His touch was no longer the protective anchor of the car ride. It was a directive. We ascended in a private elevator that required both a retinal scan and a thumbprint. When the doors finally hissed open, I expected a home. Instead, I stepped into a minimalist nightmare of gray stone, floor-to-ceiling glass, and sharp, aggressive angles. The penthouse was a fortress suspended above the city, overlooking the very streets where people were likely currently hosing my blood and his whiskey off the lounge floor. "I need to go," I said, my voice cracking as the silence of the apartment settled over me. "My brother, his medication, the night shift nurses, I have to get to the hospital." Hyunwoo shed his ruined suit jacket, revealing the intricate dark ink that climbed his forearms like ivy. He walked to a sleek black console and tapped a series of keys. Screens flickered to life against the far wall, displaying a dozen different angles of the city, the lounge, and my heart stopped, the entrance to St. Jude's Memorial. "You aren't going anywhere, Kiana," he said, turning to face me. The predatory stillness had returned. Julia didn't just want me dead. She wanted the witness dead. "By now your apartment has been tossed. Your locker at the lounge has been emptied. If you step foot in that hospital, you won't make it past the lobby." I felt the floor tilt beneath my sensible work shoes. "You don't understand. I'm all he has. If I don't show up, if the payments stop, the payments won't stop. My people are already secured at the hospital watching his door. But they are there to protect him from the people looking for you." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the polished floor. "You traded your life for mine the moment you whispered in my ear. In my world, that makes you mine to protect. And mine to keep." I looked out the window at the shimmering skyline. Somewhere down there was my cramped studio apartment, my textbooks, and my old life. From this height, they looked like grains of sand. I realized then that the concrete sanctuary wasn't just a shield, it was a cage. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a piece on a board I didn't know how to play, held captive by a man who looked at mercy as a foreign language. I couldn't go home because the Kiana who lived there was already dead. The silence of the penthouse was broken by the sharp, intrusive buzz of my phone against the marble kitchen island. It was a sound I had once associated with mundane things. Shift changes, grocery lists, or a text from the hospital update line. Now it sounded like a detonator. I reached for it, my fingers trembling so violently I nearly swiped the device onto the floor. Hyunwoo was across the room, his back to me as he spoke in rapid-fire Korean into a secure headset, but the moment my breath hitched, he froze. He didn't turn around, but I could feel his attention snap toward me like a physical weight. The message was from an unknown number. There was no text, only a single image file. I tapped it, and the world seemed to bleed of its color. It was a photo of Marcus. He looked small and fragile in his hospital bed, the pale blue of the thin blanket highlighting the grayish tint of his skin. The monitors behind him showed the steady, rhythmic pulse of a life held together by machines and expensive prayers. But it wasn't my brother that made the bile rise in my throat. It was the two men standing at the foot of his bed. They weren't wearing the white coats of doctors or the scrubs of the nursing staff. They were wearing dark, tailored suits, and one of them was leaning casually against the railing, his hand tucked into a jacket pocket in a way that suggested the heavy shape of a weapon. A sob broke from my lips before I could choke it back. "They're in his room," I whispered, the words feeling like shards of glass. "Hyunwoo, they're inside his room." In 3 strides he was beside me. He didn't ask for permission. He took the phone from my hand. His eyes narrowed as he studied the pixels, his face darkening into a mask of pure, unadulterated coldness. I saw the muscles in his jaw ripple. He recognized the men. "Julia," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "She isn't just looking for you. She's using him as an anchor to drag you out into the open." "I have to go," I panicked, grabbing his forearm, my nails digging into his skin. "I don't care about the lounge or the hit or the witness protection. That's my brother. He can't even move, he can't defend himself. If you go, you both die," Hyunwoo snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. He gripped my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. The intensity in his gaze was terrifying. Yet it was the only thing keeping me from spinning into a total breakdown. "That photo is a lure. They want you to run. They want you to lead them to me, or they want to execute you in that hallway to send me a message. Then do something." I screamed at him, the sound echoing off the cold stone walls. "You said you protect what's yours. You said I was yours." He didn't flinch. He looked down at the photo one last time, then back at me. "I am doing something, Kiana. I'm starting a war." The war had already begun. But in the sterile, soundproofed confines of the penthouse, the air felt like a tightening noose. Hyunwoo had disappeared into his office to coordinate the counterstrike, leaving me alone with my terror and the glowing image of my brother's captors. Every minute that passed felt like a drop of Marcus's blood hitting the floor. Desperation is a quiet, jagged thing. I found myself in the auxiliary mudroom, kneeling by the bag I'd brought from the lounge. I wasn't looking for a miracle. I was looking for a way out. My fingers brushed against something hard and metallic hidden in the lining of the medical kit I kept for Marcus. A small magnetized GPS tracker, and a burner phone I tucked away months ago for emergencies. I didn't hear him enter. In this house, Hyunwoo moved like smoke. "What is that, Kiana?" The voice was a low, dangerous rasp that made the marrow in my bones turn to ice. I bolted upright, but he was already there, his hand clamping around my wrist with the force of a steel trap. He twisted my arm back, forcing my palm open. The small, blinking black disc sat in my hand like a confession. I found it in the bag," I stammered, the lie dying in my throat as I looked up at him. The man who had shielded me with his own body an hour ago was gone. In his place stood the monster the tabloids feared. His obsidian eyes were void of empathy, tracking the slight tremor in my jaw. He shoved me back against the cold concrete wall, his free hand moving to his waistband. In one fluid motion, the matte black barrel of his handgun was pressed firmly beneath my chin, forcing my head back. Julia is always one step ahead. I wondered how they kept pace with an armored sedan. He hissed, his face inches from mine. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cedar was suffocating now. Did she promise you his life in exchange for my location? Did you bring this into my home to finish what the hitman started? No. Hyunwoo, please. I didn't know it was there. You're a nurse, Kiana. You're trained to notice the smallest details, he snarled, the hammer of the gun clicking back with a finality that echoed through the hall. Whose side are you on? Are you the girl who whispered a warning? Or the girl who led the wolves to my door? The cold metal bit into my skin. I looked past the weapon straight into the dark storm of his gaze. I saw his finger tighten on the trigger. In that moment, the fear vanished, replaced by a hollow, burning exhaustion. If I wanted you dead, I would have let you drink that whiskey, I whispered, my voice finally steady. Kill me if you want. But if you don't save Marcus, you're no better than the woman who betrayed you. The silence stretched, a lethal vibration between us. For 10 agonizing seconds, I was certain the last thing I would hear was the roar of his gun. Then slowly the pressure under my chin vanished. He didn't lower the gun, but he stepped back, his eyes searching mine for a truth only blood could prove. He looked at the tracker, then crushed it beneath the heel of his boot. Prove it, he said, his voice a ghost of a threat. Because if there is a second one, I won't ask questions. I'll just pull the trigger. The tension didn't evaporate, it merely changed state, shifting from a sharp, lethal edge to a heavy, suffocating weight. Hyunwoo remained standing in the center of the room, his gun lowered but his gaze still dissecting me. The crushed tracker lay between us, a black plastic corpse on the pristine floor. Tell me about the girl who supposedly found a tracker in her medical kit, he commanded. I sank onto a minimalist bench, my legs finally giving way. It wasn't for me. It was for Marcus. I looked at my hands, still smelling of the lounge's hibiscus soap and the metallic tang of his weapon. Ever since he was admitted, I've lived in fear. Debt collectors, hospital admin threatening to pull his plug, people looking for easy targets. I put that tracker in his bag so I'd always know where he was if they moved him. I forgot I'd tucked the spare into my uniform pocket until tonight. I looked up, my eyes burning. Julia must have seen me with it. Or she knew I was the kind of person who kept anchors. She didn't just sell you out, Hyunwoo. She's using the one thing I love to make me a traitor. Hyunwoo's expression shifted. It wasn't pity. Men like him didn't possess it, but a cold, analytical realization. He walked to the window, the city's neon lights reflecting off his sharp features. She didn't put the tracker there to find me, he mused, his voice a low vibration. She knew I would find it. She wanted me to kill you. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Julia hadn't just wanted a witness silenced. She wanted Hyunwoo to do the dirty work, to stain his own hands with the blood of the woman who had tried to save him, breaking his focus while her assassins closed in. She knows that love is a luxury I can't afford, and a weapon I don't know how to defend against, he said, turning back to me. For the first time, the marble predator looked human, his brow furrowed with a dark curiosity. She is using your devotion as a detonator. He stepped toward me, extending a hand, not to strike but to lift my chin. His touch was firm, the calluses on his palm a reminder of his violent trait. She thinks your weakness is your brother. She thinks my weakness is my temper. Is she right? I whispered. She was, he said, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine with a new, terrifying purpose. But she made a mistake. She assumed you were a victim and she assumed I was alone. If we are going to get your brother back and take her head, you can't be a waitress anymore. You are the only person who has seen her play her hand. That makes you my most valuable asset. An alliance was struck in the silence of that high-tech cage, born of blood, betrayal, and a shared enemy. I reached out, my fingers brushing the dark ink on his wrist. I was no longer just surviving. I was becoming a part of his war. The transition from prey to predator began in the cold blue light of the penthouse gym. Hyunwoo stood behind me, his chest a solid wall of warmth against my back, his hands guiding mine as I held a weighted practice blade. The elegance of the lounge felt like a lifetime ago. Here the only luxury was survival. You've spent years perfecting the art of being unnoticed, he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my ear. In a room full of power, the help is just part of the furniture. Julia thinks you are a coward because you stayed silent. We are going to use that silence to dismantle her. He didn't just teach me how to strike, he taught me how to watch. We spent hours reviewing surveillance footage of the rival syndicate's gala, a high-stakes charity event where Julia was expected to finalize the merger that would end Hyunwoo's reign. He pointed out the subtle tells of the men in the room, the way a guard shifted his weight before reaching for a radio, the rhythm of the security rotations, and the blind spots in the vaulted ceilings. You aren't going in there to fight, he explained, adjusting my stance until my shadow mimicked his. You are going in to plant the virus. You are a ghost, Kiana. You move through the crowd, you serve the champagne, and you listen. People talk when they think the person holding the tray doesn't have a soul. As the days bled into one another, my fear began to calcify into a sharp, cold resolve. He taught me how to conceal a micro-recorder in the seam of a lace glove, and how to slip a tracker into a pocket with a touch as light as a summer breeze. But more than the gadgets, he taught me the mindset of the underworld. He stripped away my naivety, replacing it with a lethal cynicism. They will look at your face and see a waitress, he said, his obsidian eyes locking onto mine during our final sparring session. He caught my wrist, pinning me against the padded wall. But this time I didn't flinch. I twisted, using his momentum to create space, just as he'd shown me. Let them see exactly what they expect, right up until the moment you take everything from them. I looked at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors. The woman staring back wasn't the shaking girl from the Gilded Lotus. Her eyes were hard, her posture was predatory, and her heart was a closed fist. I was no longer just a variable in his war. I was the weapon he had spent a week sharpening. I'm ready, I said, the words steady and cold. Hyunwoo stepped back, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, the first I'd ever seen. It wasn't a smile of kindness but of recognition. Then let's go give Julia the wedding present she deserves. The grand ballroom of the Seoul Plaza was a cathedral of glass and gold, vibrating with the superficial warmth of the city's most dangerous elite. I didn't enter through the service doors this time. I walked through the front entrance in a gown of midnight silk that clung to me like a second skin. My hair swept up to reveal the micro-receiver nestled in my ear. Under the weight of the chandelier light, I wasn't Kiana the waitress. I was a ghost in couture, a shadow Hyunwoo had unleashed upon his enemies. Remember, Hyunwoo's voice crackled softly in my ear, a low grounding hum. They only see what they are looking for. To them, you are just another beautiful distraction. I moved through the crowd with a predatory grace I hadn't possessed a week ago. I saw Julia near the center of the room, surrounded by the heads of the rival syndicate. She looked breathtaking in auburn waves and pearls, her laughter tinkling like breaking glass as she sipped champagne. She was the picture of a grieving fiancé-to-be, already consolidating the power she thought she'd inherited from a dead man. I circled the perimeter, my heart a steady, cold drumbeat. My objective was a private alcove where the rival's lead counsel kept his briefcase, the nexus of their digital encryption. As I passed a waiter, our eyes met for a split second. He didn't see a colleague. He saw a guest who didn't belong in his world. I felt a flicker of the old invisibility, but now it was a weapon I wielded with intent. I slipped into the shadows behind a velvet curtain, the silence of the hallway a sharp contrast to the roar of the gala. My fingers, steady and surgical, pulled the microtransmitter from my lace glove. I had 40 seconds before the security sweep returned. I'm at the terminal, I whispered into my collar. Do it, Hyunwoo urged. Plant the file. Let them see the transaction Julia made to the offshore accounts behind their backs. I slotted the device into the port. A progress bar crawled across the small screen, glowing blue against my skin. Outside I heard the click of heels, Julia's distinctive rhythmic stride. She was coming this way. My breath hitched, the old fear clawing at my throat, but then I felt the weight of the small, concealed blade Hyunwoo had strapped to my thigh. I wasn't a victim anymore. The upload finished with a soft chime. I snatched the device and stepped out just as Julia rounded the corner. She stopped, her eyes narrowing as she took in my dress, my face, and the defiant tilt of my chin. For a moment the world stood still. Recognition flared in her gaze, followed by a slow, creeping horror. "You," she hissed, her face contorting. "The help is finished for the night, Julia," I said, my voice as cold as the ice in Hyunwoo's glass. "But your shift is just beginning." I walked past her into the light of the ballroom, leaving her standing in the dark, just as the monitors across the gala began to flicker with the evidence of her ultimate betrayal. The trap was sprung. The only thing left was the blood. The ballroom was no longer a cathedral. It was a cage of panic. As the screens flashed with the undeniable proof of Julia's double-dealing, the music died a dissonant death. The rival syndicate leaders, realizing they had been used as pawns in her personal play for power, turned on her with the cold efficiency of sharks sensing blood. In the center of the storm, Julia stood paralyzed, her auburn hair disheveled as she realized the invisible Waitress had dismantled her empire with a single upload. She reached for the small pearl-handled pistol in her clutch, but she was too slow. The heavy oak doors of the gala didn't just open. They were breached. Hyunwoo entered like a force of nature, his black suit a sharp contrast to the terrified guests diving for cover. He didn't look at the chaos or the rivals reaching for their holsters. His eyes were locked on me. He moved with a lethal, terrifying purpose, clearing the distance in strides that promised an end to the night's long shadows. "Julia," he said, his voice a low melodic threat that cut through the shouting. "You forgot one thing about a coup. You have to make sure the king is actually dead." The final confrontation was swift and merciless. Hyunwoo's men flooded the room, neutralizing the traitors before a single shot could be fired in return. Julia was dragged away, her screams for mercy falling on deaf ears. The debt of her betrayal was paid in the cold currency of exile and erasure. 3 months later, the air was different. I stood on the balcony of the lakefront stronghold, the wind no longer feeling like a threat. Inside, Marcus was resting in a room equipped with the finest medical technology money could buy. His recovery no longer a prayer but a certainty. I felt a presence behind me, the familiar scent of cedar and the subtle heat of a man who had become my world. Hyunwoo wrapped his arms around my waist, his tattooed hands resting over mine. I leaned back into his chest, no longer flinching at the hardness of the man beneath the suit. "You're thinking about the lounge," he murmured against my hair. "I'm thinking about how quiet it is," I replied, turning in his arms. I used to think safety was a quiet apartment and a steady shift. I was wrong. Hyunwoo looked down at me, his obsidian eyes reflecting the moonlight and a new fierce devotion. He had traded his solitude for my loyalty, and I had traded my invisibility for a throne. "The world is a dangerous place, Kiana," he said, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "But you aren't a bystander anymore. You're the reason I'm still standing." I stood on my tiptoes and kissed him, a promise sealed in the heart of the lion's den. I had started the night as a waitress with a secret, and I had ended it as a queen with a kingdom. The concrete walls were still gray, and the man I loved was still a monster to the rest of the world. But as the city lights twinkled below us, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally home.